I want to speak today in our presentations of apologetics, the evidence for biblical faith, on the evidence from contemporary miracles. Now, all of the subjects that I speak about in these presentations is covered in my book, The Biblical Worldview and Apologetic. And it's a comprehensive textbook. It is readable. It's been in print for over 25 years, and the new edition just came out last year. So it's updated with some important information because knowledge always is increasing, and there are new writers to speak about. And as the writer of Ecclesiastes says, it is without end. But of books there is no end. But I want to speak about this issue of contemporary miracles. You know, a lot of times people say, well, I read about all those miracles in the New Testament, but if there is a God, how come those miracles don't happen today? And they say that in a way as to discredit biblical faith. But then other people say, no, we should believe on the basis of what happened back then and to expect miracles today as part of building our case for faith and belief. Well, to require miracles today would be a kind of an unbelief because after all, Yeshua said, blessed are those that believe without having seen. Now, you know, Yeshua also taught something very important that I wish I had mentioned in the first tape, and that is when we deal with the issue of evidence, a lot has to do with the will, the heart, because Yeshua said in John 7:17, if any man wills to do God's will, he shall know of the teaching, the doctrine, whether I speak for myself, whether this is true, what I'm saying. And you can know it's true, but only if you have that heart that says, God, if you're there, show me yourself, and I will to do your will. But the evidence for miracles happening today is a very important apologetic evidence. And I want to go over a few of the lines of that evidence for you today. When I was in college, I mentioned that I was a skeptic. I went through 3.5 years of skepticism from the age of 19 to 22 and a half. And they were very difficult years. But one of the things that I thought was, if I could find a real miracle, and what I meant by real miracle was something that would not be capable of a natural cause and effect explanation, not capable of it, not even conceivably capable of it. If I could find that, then I'd know that there is a supernatural realm. There's a God in some way. It wouldn't convince me, it wouldn't be sufficient proof of the whole of what biblical belief is, or what I call New Covenant faith, or Messianic Judaism, or Christianity, but it would be enough for me to have a start. And I actually went to a church where they were claiming to have a lot of miracles taking place, and most of these miracles were taking place in their mind. When I tried to establish them, they weren't there. But I wrote to a very famous healing evangelist back then, and she sent me a letter that I should look up one of my classmates, whose name was Eugene, because he was healed of a club foot in her meeting. And this was the first miracle that I found on a high level. And I looked him up, and I found out, it was amazing, that he was instantaneously healed of a club foot that he was born with. And you know, a club foot is a physically deformed foot, and therefore for a club foot to be healed, it was a creative miracle. Since that time, we have experienced other miracles. I mentioned the supernatural healing of my son in the short videos about apologetics, who had a fatal heart disease called myocarditis, and we were told to look for a cemetery plot for him, that if they could stabilize him, he would need a heart transplant, that the heart never comes back into normal shape and normal function once it has been stretched to be paper thin like that, like a balloon blown up. We had strong prophecy that he would be normal and that God would heal him. And he recovered 100% with no murmurs, no difficulties. He became an athlete and fulfilled those prophecies to a T. So we've experienced it as well. uh, what I wanted to note is that there are miracles taking place today, amazing miracles all over the world. The Western world is skeptical, so even though they're happening in the Western world, they get closed out. And as I argue in the apologetics book, Biblical Worldview, we have separate lines of communication, and they don't cross over, so we don't get cross-fertilization of information because there is a closing out of things that don't fit the skeptical worldview, the materialistic worldview of the West. But in other countries, in China, in Africa, where they don't have that problem, South America, the plenitude of the miraculous is just absolutely astonishing. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of a double volume set that confirms these kinds of miracles. The kinds of miracles that happen in the name of Yeshua are creative, instant miracles sometimes that are way beyond anything that happens in other religions or in witchcraft or in magic. So I want those that are listening to this presentation to understand that there is not only frequency but a qualitative difference in the biblical miracles. I want to read one account to you here, if I can find it in the book here. Got to even find my own marking here. This is the healing of a woman whose name was Barbara Kaminsky, and it's so powerful. Sometimes when I read it, it brings me to tears. And it was reported in Christianity Today, which is not known as a supernaturalist, charismatic publication. It's the sane and stolid intellectual publication of the mainstream scholarly world, the mainstream evangelical scholarly world. And they were looking into this issue of miracles in this particular edition. And this is the account. Barbara Kaminsky was no slight case. She had MS, multiple sclerosis, of a more rare and severe form that attacks the body's organs. Totally confined to bed, Kaminsky was in severe physical distress. She was subject to chronic lung disease, pneumonia, and asthma, had an ileostomy for the bowel, and a catheter for the bladder. She was on a respirator to breathe, with a tracheotomy in the neck. Great chest pain was unceasing. Legs were spiny and dangling. Arms and hands were turned in, and her eyesight had reached the point of technical blindness. Beyond all of this, tumors grew on her hands and feet. At 31, she was taken to a hospice to die. On June 7, 1981, a local radio station mentioned her situation and asked for prayer. On this summer day, on a Sunday, Barbara sat in bed as two women from the church read cards to her. Barbara, but not the other two women, heard a voice over her shoulder. "My child, get up and walk." Barbara assumed it was God, at last answering in kind after all those hours of audible address. She told the two women that she was going to walk and that they should alert her family. Since Barbara had not walked in 2 years, the women were confused, but they left the room. Barbara could not wait for her parents. She says she jumped out of bed. Elated, she started down the hall where her mother met her. Barbara's legs, atrophied from lack of exercise, now had muscle tone and firmness. Her mother's first words were, "Calves! You have calves!" Her father, when Barbara met him downstairs, could summon no words. He grabbed his daughter and danced around the living room with her. After waltzing with her father, Barbara did ballet steps, standing on her toes, leaping and laughing. MS is an incurable disease. Barbara Kaminsky, her doctors admit, never should have gotten well. But not only did MS leave, conclusive spine taps show no trace. Barbara's caved-in lung, dormant for years, should have been no good. It was completely healthy and functioning. The chronic lung disease, also incurable, was gone. So were the hand and feet tumors. Even if the woman somehow recovered from MS, there should have been permanent brain damage. There was not. Fortunately, the surgeon performing Barbara's ileostomy had not removed the entire bowel. Now the bowel was functioning, so the ileostomy was reversed. Likewise, the tracheotomy. Health was restored entirely, instantaneously. Today, Barbara is training to be a physician's assistant. A man she trains under was one of her doctors. He delights in introducing her to classes. Here is a woman who used to lay under my knife. I said she would not live. I said she would never walk. Now she hands me the knife. You can see how good my predictions are. In my book, I talk about the fact that we have type A, type B, and type C miracles. Type C is pretty good evidence that this is an intervention of God, but you could come up with other explanations. A B level is, man, if you try to come up with another explanation, it's really far-fetched. This is almost certainly a miracle. But type A is so pronounced, so supernatural, so instant, so miraculous, that only a perverted explanation would reject it. In the book, Miracles, 2 volumes by Craig Keener, the president of the Evangelical Theological Society in America. He goes around the world and documents miracles of quality, some of which are like this one I just read to you about. Amazing miracles, only done in the name of Yeshua, that show that God is still doing the same kind of miracles today as we read about in the pages of the Scripture. I wanted to just say one other thing about miraculous events. Today we read a lot about the evidence from near-death experiences. In my book, The Biblical Worldview, I do talk about that as well, but there is a very comprehensive book by John Burke called Imagine Heaven. And it is an amazing thing that when people die and go to heaven, and some of them die and go to hell, by the way, it's not just the descriptions of heaven that they have in common, but when they are in a death state, that's why, because they're revived, it's called near-death experiences, but many of these people were clinically dead. They describe things that couldn't be described unless the soul transcends the body. They described the medical personnel and exactly what they were doing in seeking to revive them when they had no brain waves that could be recording anything. They described being up at the ceiling looking down at what was happening to them and then going through the tunnel. And those of you who studied this know this. This is another evidence of the supernatural and the reality. And in this particular book, because John Burke is biblical in his book Imagine Heaven, he puts the interpretation in a solid biblical context and shows another evidence of the miraculous for the truth of what we believe. So I trust you, get a hold of my book, The Biblical Worldview, and be encouraged that the God of the Bible exists today and is still doing miraculous things all over the world.